drag is inherently misogynistic. To clarify, I don't think all drag queens are misogynists, nor do I think it should be banned. I will defend queens from conservatives who try to claim it's sexual or paedophilic. However, it's okay to acknowledge when something you love has negative connotations. And the specific drag queen in the clip I quoted is clearly a raging misogynist with a fragile ego. There is clearly something inherently misogynistic about the premise of men dressing as exaggerated caricatures of women, and it's okay to acknowledge that. Modern cis gay drag is inherently misogynistic and turns femininity into both a commodity and a caricature. It actively generates harmful stereotypes about trans women, has a long history of transmisogyny, and does nothing but further enrich an affluent demographic: men. Okay, today we're diving into one of the most heated debates in drag culture today. Is drag actually misogynistic? Now, a few months ago, I did see Twitter pop off with, is drag just a safe space for cis men to mock women? And don't you think it's kind of misogynistic to perform femininity by exaggerating the most ridiculous stereotypes about women? And in my thirst for knowledge, I thought, I wonder if any academics have written about this yet. And surprise, surprise, they have. Scholars like Lily Zhang and T. Walpole have dug deep into this issue, asking if drag, in its current form, perpetuates harmful gender stereotypes instead of dismantling them. So yeah, let's unpack this. Is drag really the liberating space that it claims to be, or is it just another way of poking fun at women, especially when cis men are doing the performing? Let's start with the basics. Drag is about the performance of femininity. It's a form of gender performativity. You know, the idea that gender isn't some biological fact, but rather something we perform, like a role we put on for a show. Judith Butler, my bestie, says we're all just performing gender. Now, drag takes that idea and, well, it kind of cranks it up to 11, turning femininity into an exaggerated performance. In theory, drag subverts the gender hierarchy because it's showing us that femininity and masculinity are just performances, right? Well, when done right, we would hope so. It allows for an expression of gender that doesn't result in innate ridicule of the body that it's assigned to. Due to its extreme presentation and hyperfemininity, it makes critics seem like they've missed the point entirely. However, drag can also be done wrong, reinforcing harmful views on women in particular. Yeah, we're never fucking free of it, are we? Like, it doesn't even matter if the space isn't meant for us, we're still, victims within it. Lily Zhang points out, when drag queens, especially cis men, exaggerate femininity, it often leans into misogynistic stereotypes. Oh, women are so emotional, they're obsessed with shopping, they're totally drama queens. Sound familiar? This kind of drag that can sometimes be seen on shows like RuPaul's Drag Race can end up reinforcing the various stereotypes it tries to critique. So while drag can be subversive, it can also be a caricature of women, reducing them to a bunch of shallow traits for comedic effect. Ouch, right? I, for one, though I understand where that argument comes from, think it's a little too far-fetched. Whilst this can definitely be an effect, I also wonder how many people that are watching drag would easily be swayed by these stereotypes, and therefore believe them to be accurate representations of women. Though we may understand the purpose of drag, it is important, however, to acknowledge that these presentations don't exist in a vacuum. So, whilst I personally don't see it that way, that doesn't mean that drag doesn't lean on these stereotypes and therefore do what Zhang is arguing. But it's not only cisgendered men that perpetuate these stereotypes. Catherine Hobson argues that female drag performances can both perpetuate oppression and promote social justice, sometimes in the same breath. But that seems obvious, right? Like, as women, we are not ultimately free from doing misogyny. We still do it to other women, and we also internalize it and use it against ourselves. Like everything else in the realm of gender politics, drag is complicated. It can either empower by taking control of femininity or perpetuate harmful tropes. It's about how it's done and in what context, and that's a delicate balance. Let's talk a little bit more about cis women doing drag. Now, my first introduction to this concept was Chapel Rome. However, this is also a huge part of the drag scene. These ladies are reclaiming femininity from a whole different angle, and honestly, it's refreshing. Femme queens, also known as foul queens, are not just throwing on heels and lipstick for kicks. They're redefining femininity in drag. And yet, even within drag, cis women doing drag often face resistance like, wait, you're not a real queen. Femme queens are often marginalised within the drag community. There's this weird vibe that because they're women in the first place, they're not allowed to perform femininity in the exaggerated, subversive ways that drag demands. That's right, misogyny isn't just outside drag, it's very often within the drag community itself. And that is a huge issue. The drag community needs to get over this idea that only men performing femininity counts as subversive. Femme queens are out here trying to make drag more inclusive, not just a space for men to have fun with gender at the expense of women. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. These performances might try to reclaim femininity, but they often end up objectifying women instead. Because at the end of the day, even if we are mocking the expectation of hyperfemininity by performing it, this can result in harmful portrayals as women, as well as criticize those who conform to these feminine expectations. I've always been of the view that women should not be held responsible for how their actions are interpreted as a representation of what all women are. And whilst I still believe this, it would be naive to ignore that our actions are used and interpreted this way. Whilst that is wrong, defining all women by the actions of a few, if we already know that that is going to happen, we can approach the situation with some tact. This is why femme queens have to constantly navigate this fine line between empowerment and mockery. It's a tricky thing. But femme queens do prove that drag is for everyone, and it needs to be for everyone if it's ever going to live up to its radical roots. As this tweet points out, drag has often been argued to perpetuate harmful stereotypes about trans women. As well as this, it has been quite exclusionary in the past. This one's been a hot topic for a while, especially after RuPaul's 2018 comments about probably not letting trans women compete on RuPaul's Drag Race, and later apologising for them. This whole situation raised the question, is it even fair to say that trans women are performing drag? After all, aren't they already living their femininity? So if a trans woman performs drag, is she performing femininity for fun, like cisgendered men? Or is it a performance of her own lived femininity? This is where Dougherty's research comes in. She suggests that trans women in drag are navigating a complex space where their drag is both an expression of their femininity and a form of performance. But, and this is important, trans women drag queens aren't just performing in the same way that cis men are. Their drag is not some satirical take on femininity. It's a way to express and reclaim their own identity. The fact that RuPaul's show and drag queen competitions in general excluded them for so long is just a symptom of transmisogyny within drag culture, which continues to marginalise trans women. But, as Walpole argues, transmisogyny is real. Trans women in drag face a unique type of oppression, even within a supposedly progressive space like drag. So, while drag is supposed to be subversive, it's clear that cis-normative gatekeeping still runs rampant. And in order to be truly liberatory, drag has to change. And we can't forget drag kings, even if the mainstream, often fails to acknowledge their existence. We talked about drag queens performing exaggerated femininity, but drag kings are out here performing masculinity, and they do it with style. Drag kings subvert traditional gender roles by making masculinity ridiculous, and it's a powerful statement against patriarchal norms. Drag kings basically ask, what if masculinity is just as absurd as femininity? The rise of drag kings is expanding the drag conversation in a big way. They're showing us that gender isn't binary, it's a whole spectrum. Drag kings offer an alternative to the mainstream drag queen narrative, providing space for both exaggerated femininity and masculinity to exist side by side. It's a reminder that drag is an art form that can critique all kinds of gender norms. And, as we see with drag kings, it doesn't have to rely on mocking women to do so. So is drag misogynistic? Well, this surface level analysis basically says that it's complicated. Here she goes again with the fence-sitting nuanced takes. Drag at its best subverts gender norms and challenges the status quo, but when it leans into harmful stereotypes and reinforces the systems it tries to critique, well then it becomes problematic. Femme queens, drag kings and trans women all challenge traditional ideas of gender, but drag culture still has a long way to go in making space for everyone, especially trans women, without falling into the traps of misogyny and transmisogyny. Drag is powerful, yes, but it has a lot of work to do to be truly inclusive and radically feminist, because honestly, what's the point of critiquing gender norms if we just replace them with new ones? But that's just what the theory has said and what my opinions on that theory has said. I recognise that I myself am not involved with drag, and I'm not necessarily the identity that would perform drag. However, I think it's important to acknowledge why people view it as misogynistic and the theory that will back up the points and argue against it. That being said, if you do have any opinions or any enlightenments you want to make in the comment section, feel free, just keep the discussion respectable. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you're new, and with that, I'll see you soon.